This is a worked out answer key to Study Guide 9, since I know I gave you the notes live, but you won't have an opportunity to ask me questions live. So we're going to go through and work on this rather quickly. So for Study Guide 9, this is when we introduced inverse trig functions. And the first thing that you need to remember with your inverse trig functions, oops, that's supposed to be my quadrants, that all of the different trig functions are found in quadrant 1, and they're all positive in quadrant 1. Nothing is ever found in quadrant 3, and you are going to find your cosine and whatever is related to cosine and secant in quadrant number 2, and along with your cotangent. And in this quadrant, these would all be negative. And in quadrant 4, you would find your sine and what's related to sine, cosecant. And the tangent would also be found in quadrant 4, and they would all be negative. So remember, when you're working with inverse, inverse is written as arc, or it is written as a -1 power. These are looking for angle measures. So this is asking me, where do I get an angle measure? And it's got to be only in these given quadrants. So arc sine. Arc sine is either found in quadrant 1 or 4. This is positive, so I know I'm going to be able to find it in quadrant number 1. Sine stands for opposite over hypotenuse. So my opposite is √3, my hypotenuse is 2, and that missing side would be 1. That means that technically this would be a 60-degree angle. The question says I'm supposed to find the exact value. If the exact value is an angle measure, they want it in degrees and radians. So what is my rotation to that hypotenuse? 60 degrees, or what I would prefer you to be talking about in radians at this point, which would be pi over 3. Okay, so there's the first problem. So now we're looking for an arc cosine. And our cosine is either found in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. It is positive, so it is going to be found in quadrant number 1. Cosine stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. The adjacent side is √3. The hypotenuse is 2. That means my missing side is 1, which means my reference angle this time is 30 degrees. These are angles because when it's after an arc, remember, inverse means angle, inverse and angle. So what's that rotation? It would be 30 degrees or a pi over 6. Okay, so continuing on. Now it's got a sine inverse, but it's written -1. Means the same thing. Sine is either found in quadrants 1 or 4. This is negative, so we're going to build our triangle in quadrant 4. Sine stands for opposite over hypotenuse. Ew, ew, I can't have an opposite and a hypotenuse. This does not work. Does not work. So now I need to think about quadrantal angles. So I'm going to switch colors. So think quadrantals. So if I'm thinking about the quadrantal angles, where is sine -1? Sine would be 1, -1, 0, 0. Remember, doesn't work here, doesn't work here. This is the edge. So where does that happen? Now, normally I would like to be working around this way, but you can't go through those regions that you can't work through. So the rotation is this way. So in this case, it would be negative 90 degrees or negative pi over 2. And think back to what we drew on your notes about where you could find those. That should help with an explanation of why you need those negatives. So go back, review your notes if you don't get it. Tangent inverse. So we're finally into tangent. Tangent is found in either quadrant 1 or 4. It is positive. If my pen will write positive, positive would be drawn in quadrant 1. Tangent stands for opposite over adjacent. Okay, opposite side is root 3, adjacent side is 1, meaning the hypotenuse is 2. That means my reference angle would be 60 degrees. So my rotation would be 60 degrees, or in terms of radians, it would be pi over 3. Wow, this is going by quick and fast. So now let's look at problem 5. For problem 5, I have a cosine. Cosine is either found in quadrant 1 or 2. It's negative. So since it's negative, it's going to be found in quadrant number 2. Cosine stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent is root 3. Hypotenuse is 2. Missing side is 1. That means my reference angle is 30 degrees, but my rotation would be 150 degrees, or in terms of pi, it would be 5 pi over 6. Last one. We never have triangles that have root 3 and 3 in them. So I know my 30, 60, 90s, they have 1 root 3, 2, or 1, 1 root 2. So we need to unrationalize this first. And this is something that you should be starting to be able to identify. So unrationalizing it, I am going to, in green here, multiply top by root 3, bottom by root 3, and I end up with negative 3 over 3 roots of 3, which these cancel out, which is negative 1 over root 3. So this is really the arc tangent of negative 1 over root 3. Better, I can draw that out. So tangent. Tangent is found in quadrants 1 or 2, or 1 or 4. It is negative, so it's found in quadrant number 4. Tangent stands for opposite over adjacent. Opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse is 2. That means that this is a 30-degree angle. And for that 30-degree angle, remember, for rotation, we always want to go this way, but you can never go through an area that's been crossed out. So our rotation's got to go in the negative direction. So my answer is negative 30 degrees, which would also be negative pi over 6. So we're done with page 1. Hopefully you're starting to get that. So now we're going on to page 2, and the problems change a little bit, but they don't change the directions. But just like any other type of problem, what we're going to do is we're going to start with this inside stuff. This is going to help me draw the triangle. Okay, so if I can draw the triangle, then I can answer the question. So, arc cosine, or cosine to the negative 1 power. Cosine can only be found in quadrants 1 or 2. Since this is positive, it's found in quadrant 1. Got it? Cosine stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. Uh-oh! Red flag, red flag. This does not work. You cannot have a hypotenuse being the same as the adjacent. So switching colors, now I need to think quadrantals. Okay, so thinking about the quadrantals, cosine. Cosine is 0, 0, 1, negative 1. Oh, look, right here it's 1. So when I'm thinking quadrantals, I am dealing with everything that's on that positive x-axis where I put that big blue dot. Okay, so the red found me this spot here. I want to find the tangent value at this spot. So tangent is no solution, 0, 0. My answer is 0, and that is considered 0. That's its value. It's not radians, it's not degrees. The answer is 0. That's the ratio of the sides. So keep that in mind. Let's go to the next one. So for the next one, it starts off with an arc sine on the inside. Arc sine can only be built in quadrants 1 or 4. It's negative, so I'm going to build it in quadrant 4. Got it built. Our sine stands for opposite over hypotenuse. My opposite is 1, my hypotenuse is 2. The missing side would be root 3. Okay, so we've got that. So now I need to find the tangent of this triangle I drew. Tangent stands for opposite over adjacent. My answer is 1 over root 3. Almost done. I also need to remember a super trig class. Only cosine is positive in quadrant 4, so this needs to be negative. Now, I leave my answer in this form here. I just want to point out that if this was a multiple choice test or a multiple choice question on the test, could it be rationalized to that? So you've got to start to recognize your rational numbers. So notice these two-part questions, you're doing the inside part that builds the triangle. The outside part, you just take the trig ratio of it. Okay, so let's go inside. Tangent. Tangent is found either in quadrants 1 or 4. It's positive, so we put it in quadrant 1. This stands for opposite. This is adjacent. So my opposite is 3, my adjacent is 5, and I have to do the Pythagorean theorem to solve for my hypotenuse, which would be 3 squared or 9. Ooh, looks messy. Let me erase that. 3 squared, which is 9, plus 5 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So this is 9 plus 25, that plus sign didn't come, equals hypotenuse squared. That's 34. The square root of 34 is what my hypotenuse is going to be. Square root 34. Got it. Okay, so now switching colors, I take the cosine of the triangle. Cosine stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. So my answer is 5 over square root of 34. Now, I remember a super trig class. Everything is positive in quadrant 1. Final answer. Okay, for number 10, tangent. Tangent is found either in quadrants 1 or 4. It's positive, it's 1. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Root 3, 1, and 2. Now I need to take the sine of this triangle. So my sine value stands for opposite over hypotenuse. So root 3 over 2. I remember a super trig class. Everything is positive, so root 3 over 2 is my final answer. Last one. I have a sine. Ooh, sorry about that. Sine is found in quadrants 1 or 4. It's positive, so I find it in quadrant 1. Sine stands for opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is 4, hypotenuse is 9. I need to do the Pythagorean theorem to solve for that missing side. So 4 squared plus x squared is going to equal 9 squared. So x squared is going to equal 81 subtract 16. X is going to equal the square root of 65. Square root 65. Okay, switching colors, now I'm going to take the cosine. Cosine stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. So my final answer is square root of 65 over 9. Again, I'm also thinking super trig class. Cosine is positive there. So that's my answer. And finally, before we even begin, I don't have triangles that have both root 2 and 2 in it, so unrationalize it. So multiply top and bottom by root 2, which gives me negative 2 over 2 roots of 2. They cancel. So this problem really is the sine of the cosine inverse of negative 1 over root 2. Okay, so cosine is built in either quadrants 1 or 2. It's negative, so I'm building it in quadrant 2. I have my adjacent 1, my hypotenuse root 2, missing side is 1. So now that I have that triangle built, it asks me to take the sine of it. Sine stands for opposite over hypotenuse, 1 over root 2. I'm also thinking a super trig class. It's positive, and that's my answer. If you had any questions, I hope this helped.